So this is the marking scheme. We can just download this. And this is the question paper. Let's download this as well. Okay, just a second. So desktop, that's fine. And this is also what we will download. Desktop, that's fine. Okay, great. So let's look at the SO questions and then let's get started. Okay, so as you might know, let me walk you through the pattern of paper 2 if you're not familiar, right? So it's 1 hour 30-minute exam, right? Paper 2, it's structured questions. So there are two sections to it, section A, section B. Section A is a case study, right? So there is some passage given to you, and based on that passage, as you can see, this is the passage given to you. This is May June 2015 exam. Based on those, there are some questions that you need to answer, right? Easy. And these are all compulsory questions, so you don't have an option. And the total marks for the essay questions are 20, 2, 2, 4, 2, 6, 10, and 10, right? 20 marks. And then for section B, you have 3 essay questions. Each essay question is for 20 marks, and you have to attempt one, right? Right. Okay. Okay. He said no worry. No worry. Okay. Now let's read the questions together, and then we'll choose one question to do first, and then we'll do the rest later. Okay. Explain how economists measure the way in which demand for a good changes when income changes, and with the help of a diagram, show why some goods are classified as inferior goods. Right. So the first essay question says how economists measure the way in which demand for a good changes when income changes, and with the help of a diagram, show why some goods are classified as inferior goods. Then the B part to the question says, discuss how useful governments might find the concepts of price and income elasticity of demand when setting economic policy, right? Ready, get it? Okay, now this is first question. Then the second question here says, using examples, explain the difference between merit and public goods and show why it is possible to profit. Why is it possible for profit to be made in the supply of one of the types of good, but not the other? Then the B part to the question says, explain why merit goods are undersupplied in a free market economy and consider the effectiveness of one policy to deal with this problem, right? Then the last question says, explain how declining exchange rate and a high rate of inflation in an economy might affect that economy's terms of trade. And B part says, discuss the advantages and disadvantages to an economy of a fall in the economy's terms of trade and consider whether overall effects are likely to be beneficial. Right? Is this making sense, students? Okay, now let's get started here, right? So which question do you want me to do? Which question would you want to start off with? Yeah. Which question should we start off with? Come on, students, anyone. So let's start off with the first one, right? So how about why we are thinking so much about it, right? So let's start off with the first one. Okay, now, just a second, right? So we'll just copy paste this question in our answer sheet here and then get started. Okay, now the A part, students. The A part says, explain how economists measure the way in which demand for a good changes when income changes, right? Now, we do know just by reading the statement that it's talking about income elasticity of demand, right? The relationship between demanded of a product, consumer incomes is known as income elasticity of demand, right? So this is how you can start off your answer, that the relationship between the quantity demanded of a product with consumer incomes, right? With consumers' income is known as income elasticity of demand, right? Then you will write down the formula. You remember the formula? Formula for YED. Now, how do we denote YED? Income elasticity of demand, we write YED. Y stands for income in economics. So that is basically percentage change in quantity demanded of a product divided by percentage change in income. Now, what this calculates is basically that how much will be the change in demand for a product, how much will be the change in demand for a good due to change in its income. That's what it shows. That's what income elasticity of demand is. Any confusion so far, students? Right? Is this making sense? Okay. Then you will say, right? Right. The goods can have a positive or a negative relationship, or negative relationship with the demand for the good would be a better word. The quantity demanded for a product can have a positive or negative relationship with consumers' incomes. Is this making sense? Which means some products, higher incomes result in higher quantity demanded, and vice versa for other products, higher incomes result in lower quantity demanded. Right? Now think about this. So first of all, we started off by defining what income elasticity of demand is. So income elasticity of demand, just like other measures of elasticity, capture the relationship between consumer income and demand for a good. So due to change in consumer income, how much will be the change in demand for the good? That's what income elasticity of demand captures. Then what you need to do next in your answer is to mention the formula. So the formula is fairly simple. So income elasticity of demand, which is denoted as YED, is equals to percentage change in demand for a good divided by percentage change in income. Okay. Then what does it show? The quantity demand for a product can have a positive or negative relationship with consumers' incomes, which means for some products, higher income result in higher quantity demanded, and vice versa for other products, higher incomes result in low quantity demanded, right? Now let's give some examples. For questions like these, it's always good to add some examples. For instance, can you give me some example? Right? Can you give me some examples for these products which QD increases to products for which quantity demand increases due to incomes, due to rise in incomes. In incomes are known as what? Due to rise in incomes are known as normal goods. Are known as normal goods. For instance, right? Air tickets, right? Expensive clothes, shoes, right? Are you getting me, students? Right? Okay. Now, luxury, exactly. Very good. Excellent. So now what we are doing next, we are defining the term, right? So we are saying that goods which have positive relationship with consumer incomes, they are defined as normal goods, right? So higher the income of a consumer, higher the demand for that product, it's known as a normal good. And for normal goods, the idea is that what are some examples of normal goods? Like expensive clothes. When you get more incomes, you buy more expensive clothes. When you shoes, accessories, luxury items, basically. Similarly, air tickets. Think about this. When will you spend more on traveling in all these things? When you have higher incomes. So all of these are defined as normal goods, right? Easy. Then within normal goods, there are two types. Do you remember this or not? Within normal goods, there are two types. There are two further classification of goods, namely high, namely more elastic goods, less elastic, right? Now let's think about some examples. If you think of food versus air tickets, will both of these be normal goods? I'm asking you an example, right? So if you compare these two products, air tickets and food. So first question is that do you consider both of these items to be normal goods? Firstly, and secondly, if both of these are normal goods, then for which product do you expect the demand to be more elastic? For which income elasticity, for which of the two products would you expect the income elasticity of demand to be more elastic? And for which product would you expect the income elasticity of demand to be less elastic? That's the question. So what do you think? First of all, tell me if you expect both these products to be normal goods. And the answer is food is exactly, both will be normal. Sorry, Faizan, I just read your message. Yes, both will be normal and food would be less elastic. Excellent, students. Now, think about this. When I get more incomes, I mean, I was consuming food anyways. It's not that when I get rich or anyone gets rich, they start consuming food altogether. They might be buying expensive items. I get it. They might be going to more expensive restaurants. They might be ordering, expensive food and so on, right? But still, normal food items will be normal, like less elastic, right? So they will not consume more. So the basic rice, the basic stuff, the ingredients, food items that you buy, their demand will stay the same. But these are normal goods. Like higher the income, higher the demand, a little bit higher, not that much. Whereas luxury items like air tickets, which basically shows that you're traveling more, expensive clothes, expensive shoes, that's where you'll spend most of your income in, right? And you also need to explain, right, that why so. So just like I explained that more elastic are the goods for which the demand will significantly increase, right? More than proportionate increase. What's the definition of more elastic? For more elastic products, any increase in consumers' income will result more than proportionate change in will result in more than proportionate change in quantity demanded product. Is this making sense? Whereas for less elastic, it's the opposite. You do understand what more than proportionate means, right? More than proportionate means that if your incomes are increasing by 2%, then your demand would increase by more than 2%. Yes or no, right? So students, the idea is simple. So what is YED? So YED, which is income elasticity of demand, right, captures the change in demand for a good due to change in consumers' income. So you have percentage change on in the numerator, right? And percentage change in incomes in the denominator, right? Now, if we say it's more elastic, so what we basically mean that any increase in income, which is in the denominator, will result in more than proportionate increase in the numerator, right? Will result in more than proportionate increase in the numerator, right? So let's say if this is 2% in the denominator, incomes are increasing by 2%. And if it's a normal good, also be clear whether it's normal or inferior, because then that will determine the direction of change. So if there is 2% increase in the income in the denominator, right, then for more elastic product, normal good, it will be more than proportionate change. So something more than 2%, could be 3%, could be 3.5, but anything more than 2%, right? On the other hand, if it's less elastic, right, if it's less elastic, the idea is simple. It will be still a positive change. It will still be a positive change because the direction of the two variables has to be the same. So if incomes are increasing by 2%, so your demand for the good will also increase, but something less than 2%, right? So let's say it would be positive 1.5%. Easy. And the easiest way to know whether it's more elastic or less elastic is that if the overall value is greater than 1, it's more elastic. If overall value is less than 1, it's less elastic. And this is same for income elasticity of demand, cross elasticity of demand, price elasticity of demand. So that is what it is, right? Okay. Then after you've explained all this, then you need to move forward and give some examples of inferior goods. What are some inferior goods? Give me an example of inferior good. Increase consumers' income decreases their right? Okay, now think about this. So inferior goods are for which any increase in consumers' income decreases their demand. For instance, cheap, cheaper versions of any product. Now think about this. When you get higher incomes, what would you do? What would anyone do? They will stop buying cheaper version of the product and they'll switch to something more expensive, right? That's how it happens. So let's say if you think about, I don't know, don't want to say this, but if let's say Huawei and Oppo, right? So these are some cheaper brands of the phone. So when consumers' income increase, they'll switch to something more expensive, like uh, Apple or Samsung or something, right? So those are inferior goods. Similarly, another example would be, let's say, previously when someone had lower incomes, so that person was buying, let's say, that person used to go to KFC or McDonald's. Now with higher incomes, that person can go to, more expensive restaurants. So that food, that fast food has now become an inferior good for that person. Yes or no, right? So that's what you need to explain. And this is all, right? Okay, but it said about the graph. We have to explain with the help of a graph. Now, can you tell me what type of graph the examiner is looking for, right? So firstly, for the normal good, right? What's the relationship? Relationship is positive, right? So you can have income on the x-axis and you have quantity demanded on the x-axis, or vice versa. You can also use the labels in other way, right? It doesn't make any difference, right? But let me go to show you what I mean here, right? Then you have this, and then you have this, right? So have a look at this, right? Okay, now students, have a look at this. So let me first label the axes, right? So you have income. Let's take income for both graphs, income on the y-axis and quantity demanded on the x-axis, right? And similarly, you will have quantity demanded on the x-axis. Similarly, you will have income on the y-axis, right? Income on the y-axis, and you have quantity demanded on the x-axis. Okay. For normal good, it's upward sloping, right? Simple to understand, right? Higher the income, higher the demand. For inferior good, it's the other way around, right? Higher the income, lower the demand, right? Is this making sense? So this one is for inferior good, because when you have higher income, why would you want to buy a cheaper product? You would switch to expensive goods. That's the simple explanation for that. And for normal good, since you want, it's a high quality good, right? Or you like it. So when you get higher incomes, you spend more of your income on that thing, right? Easy. Any confusion, students? Are we good on this? Does it make sense? Okay, right? Good. Okay. Now let's move to the B part of the question. If there is, by the way, if there's any question, any confusion, you have to ask me in the middle. Discuss how governments might find the concepts of price and income elasticity of demand, how useful the government might find the concept of income and price elasticity of demand when setting economic policy. Now, first thing that you have to do, you have to explain what PED is. Why? Because that was not explained in the previous question. That was not explained, right, in the previous part, right? Income elasticity of demand was explained, but PED was not explained. Explain price elasticity of demand. So what is price elasticity of demand? It is a formula that captures change in demand for a product, change in its price. Confusion, right? Students, simple, easy. Okay. Then you can obviously write down the formula. It's simple. We have seen it a couple of times. We are absolutely clear on it and all that, right? Okay. Now, what type of government policy, what type of, policy tools might government need to, in what type of government tools might government need to review the PED and in YED? Think about this. So government policy tools. So one is what? Taxes, right? Then you have subsidies, right? Then you have what? What are the tools government frequently use? Income taxes, yes or no, right? What else? So generally indirect taxes. Let me be more specific here. Indirect taxes, income taxes, we know are direct taxes because they are directly on the income of individuals, right? So let's talk about these three. I think these are all what they're talking about. Okay, now students, think about this. Let's first talk about indirect tax. What happens when an indirect tax is imposed? We know the process, the supply shifts to the left, less quantities being consumed and all that. But who gets to face a greater burden of the tax? Out of consumers and producers, do you remember we talked about this in our classes? Out of consumer and producer, which group gets to face more burden of the tax? Do you remember? Right? So whenever an indirect tax is imposed, it's the group with less elastic. The group with less elastic, demand or supply. So have a look at this. Upward sloping was your supply. Downward sloping was your demand. Right? Now, wherever the two were equal, that was your initial equilibrium. Got it? Easy? Okay. Now this was your original equilibrium, E1. Now, then what happened? Government imposed an indirect tax, which caused a leftward shift in your supply, right? So it went from S1 to S2. Easy. So this becomes the new equilibrium. Now, in this case, you might be able to see that the both parties are facing almost equal burden of the tax. By the way, do you know how this is done? Or if you are confused, please ask me, because then I'll explain you in detail again, right? If you stay silent, then I'll assume that everyone knows. And, that's clear. But if you don't, please ask me, right? So think about this. Where the original supply and demand were intersecting, that was your original equilibrium, right? That original equilibrium showed you the original equilibrium quantity, which was Q1 and P1, right? Easy? Okay. Now, then when supply shifted to the left because government imposed an indirect tax, right? Now this became the new price. This is the price that consumers are paying. What is this price? This is the price that consumers, so you can also write this down as PC, right? Then from this new equilibrium point, you need to bring this dotted line down, as you can see, to the old supply curve. Listen to this one more time. So from the new equilibrium point, where's the new equilibrium? Where new supply intersects with the demand. You need to bring a line down straight to the old old supply curve, previous supply curve, and then you connect it to the y-axis and you label it as PP. This is the price that producers are receiving. This is the price that producers are receiving, right? Now think about this. This is the total amount of tax per unit, right? This is the total amount of tax per unit. And how much of this is along the demand curve? How much of this is along the demand curve, right? This is the burden of consumers. And how much of this is along the supply curve? That is the burden of consumers. Students, are you following me? Now in this graph, it's more or less the same, so we can't really differentiate which one is facing more. But if I make an inelastic demand and elastic supply, so this is an inelastic demand, and then I'll make a elastic supply curve, right? Students, now I'm just about to show you that how the burden of the tax differs depending upon the elasticity. Then when the government will impose an indirect tax, your supply shifts to the left. So the mechanism is the same, right? No difference. But have a look at this. Now this is your new supply curve. So let's first label the original equilibrium. So where the original supply was intersecting with your original demand, that was your original equilibrium point, right? So this is your E1, right? And this is your P1, right? E1 and P1, right? Easy. So this is where your original equilibrium was. Got it? P1 and Q1. Okay. Then when your supply shifted to the left, this became your new equilibrium point. Easy. This became your new equilibrium point. So you connect it to the y-axis. You connect it to the y-axis, right? So this is your P2. And so let's write it PC because this is the price that consumers are paying. And this becomes your Q2. You bring it down and you label it as Q2. Easy. Any confusion about it? Anything that's not clear, right? We good? Okay, now think about this. From the new equilibrium, you need to bring this dotted line down to the old supply curve, and then you connect it to the y-axis. Now you can see for yourself that this is the price that consumers receive. This is the price that, so I can write this down as PP, price that consumers are receiving. Now on this graph, out of this total text per unit, how much is this being paid by consumers? So this is the amount out of this total amount, right? Out of this total text per unit, this is how much consumers are paying, and only a tiny amount is being paid by consumers. Are you getting? So when demand is inelastic, let me give you also a real life example to relate to this. What type of products have inelastic demand? Can you give me an example? What type of products have inelastic price elasticity of demand? Students, shouldn't be difficult. What type of products have inelastic demand, right? So let me give you an example. You know it, right? Food item, right? Basic necessities, simple. So food items, addictive items like cigarettes, medicines, right? Necessities, addictive items, cigarettes, food, all these things, right? Good. Yeah, bread, basic food items, right? Correct, right? Now think about this. If government imposes, now just think of a real life scenario. If government imposes taxes on food items or on cigarettes, do you think that people will stop consuming, food? Perhaps some items of the food, yeah, because that's expensive. They might not buy those, but the basic food items demand will stay the same, because what can you do? I mean, you have no choice. You have to eat something, right? So that's the reason that when government imposes indirect tax on basic necessities, right, or products with less elastic demand, it's easier for the producer to transfer the burden to consumer. How many of you got this? It's easier to transfer the burden from consumer to, sorry, it's easier for producer burden to consumer. For producers, it's easier to transfer the burden of tax to consumers, right? Because they know they can't give up on this product. They have to consume it anyways. But on the other hand, vice versa is true. That if supply is inelastic and demand is elastic, then who will face more burden of the tax? Then who faces more burden of the tax? It's the producer, right, students? So even if you don't want to draw the graph, it's not a problem, but then you have to use adequate examples to explain and elaborate your point. Right? Are you getting me? Let's do it like this. If demand is less elastic compared to supply, like for basic necessities, then it is easier for producers to transfer the burden on consumers, and vice versa. Therefore, consumers that face greater burden of tax. On the other hand, when supply is less elastic than demand, then it is the producers who face more burden of indirect tax. Students, are you following me? Any confusion, right? And then you have to use examples, right? Okay. Now, this is what is important for the government to understand, that whenever they impose an indirect tax, they can predict, government can accurately predict that which of the two groups will be facing more burden of the tax just by looking at the elasticity. So if demand is less elastic, it will be the consumers. And if supply is inelastic, it will be the producers, right? Okay, are we getting this? Okay, now what about subsidies? In subsidies, is it any different or is it the same? Students? Do you remember we made this graph? By the way, if you're confused, I'm saying it again, please tell me. I can explain you this all over again. So same goes for subsidy, students. If you are confused or if you have forgotten, let me tell you again, right? So what you have to do in the case of subsidy, what happens? So you have upward sloping supply and you have downward sloping demand. Sorry about that. You have upward sloping supply, you have downward sloping demand, right? So this is your supply curve, this is your demand curve. Now, opposite to what happens in indirect taxes, in case of subsidy, your supply curve shifts rightwards, which would be a rightward shift like this from S1 to S2. Easy? Any confusion so far? Right? Okay. Now, original equilibrium was where the original supply and demand were intersecting. So you can also, just a second. So it will be, this was the original price. So let's say this is P1. This was your original quantity. Let's say Q1, right? Easy. So P1 and Q1, right? This was your original equilibrium. Then your new equilibrium will be, right, where the new supply curve intersects with your demand. New supply curve intersects with your demand. So it would be Q2 and P2. It would be Q2 and P2, right? Okay, now this is the price, by the way, let's not write P2, let's write PC. This is the price that consumers are paying. And why is this less than before? Because obviously government gives subsidy, so the benefit of the subsidy gets divided between producers and consumers. Just like the burden of the tax gets divided between consumers and producers, the benefit of subsidy also gets divided between consumers and producers. Okay, now what you need to do, this is E2. Now you need to take this line up to the old supply curve. You need to take this line up to the old supply curve and you need to connect it to this old supply curve over here, right? So this, then you connect it with the y-axis. This is your PP. This is your PP, meaning the price that producers will receive. And why are producers receiving a higher price? Because some burden, some benefit, sorry, is going to producers as well. So this is subsidy per unit. This is the subsidy, like 10 rupees, 15 rupees, whatever the government decided, right? Subsidy, this is your subsidy per unit. Any confusion about this? We good on this, right? Okay. Now the idea is in this graph, you can see that almost it's the equal length of the two, right? So this vertical length is the benefit out of this total subsidy per unit, right? This is the one that consumers received, right, in terms of lower prices. And the remaining part is the one that producers received in terms of higher compensation, right, benefits. But if you see, I mean, there's not much of a difference, but still consumers are getting a little more benefit compared to producers because this orange line is longer than this blue line. Students, are you following me? Right? Now, long story short, if we would have changed this example, and would have made demand inelastic. So if we would have changed this example and we would have made demand inelastic, so you would have seen that it's the consumers who would face, who will get more benefit of the subsidy, right? Let me quickly show you over here and then we can, move forward, right? So if you look at this, right? So have a look at this. So if you make demand inelastic like this, right? So let's label it as D1, right? Now, what was the original equilibrium? Where the original supply and original demand were intersecting, right? So this was your equilibrium, right? So this was your P1 and this was your Q1, right? And again, if you can make these graphs on an exam, I mean, that is recommended. But since the question doesn't say with the help of a diagram, so you're not supposed to. Even if you don't make it, but you explain it well with examples, you'll get full credit, right? Now, where the new supply intersects with your demand, where this new supply intersects with your demand, that will be your new equilibrium point, right? That will be your new equilibrium point, right? So let's label it as PC. This is the price that consumers pay, right? Now, what you have to do from this new equilibrium point, you'll take a line straight up to the old supply curve, right? Just like we were doing in indirect taxes. That from new equilibrium point, you take the line back to previous supply curve, right? So you take it up vertically up and then see where is this cutting with the um, old supply curve, and then you connect it with the y-axis. Then you connect it to the y-axis and you label it as PP, the price that producers will receive. Now this vertical distance between PP and PC, so producers are receiving more compensation and consumers are paying less. How is that even possible? How can producers get more price for something for which consumers are paying less? That is because, right? That is because, government is giving subsidy. Yes or no, right? Now, have a look at this. Just give me a second. Okay, right. Now, this being said, so this is the benefit that producers receive in terms of higher prices, and this is the benefit that consumers receive in terms of lower prices. Who is getting more benefit? Obviously, the consumers. So just like the more inelastic the demand is, in case of indirect taxes, consumers face more burden of it. And similarly, in subsidy, whichever of the two is inelastic out of demand and supply, that's the group that receives more benefit. So in this case, demand was inelastic, and who received more benefit of it? The consumers received more benefit because demand was inelastic compared to supply. Easy. We're good on this. So students, let's stop here for today, and I'll see you tomorrow, and then we'll continue with our practice, right? I'll see you tomorrow. But if anything from today's class was not clear, please ask me again tomorrow, right? I don't mind explaining this again, but it's important.